now Dr. Carlos Del Rio and Dr. Amish Adalja, infectious disease specialist at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Gentlemen, as we look at what we just heard from Elizabeth and where we stand today in terms of a vaccine, there are dates being thrown around. There is a lot of hope out there. Dr. Adalja, should we be talking about specific dates at this point?
No, I think it's premature to think about an exact date because you don't want people to get a false hope that a vaccine is going to be available next year or even 18 months from now, because this is something that takes time. Vaccine development is usually measured in years, not in months, and the 12 to 18 months that we keep hearing about, that's very optimistic. If everything goes very well through all the clinical trials, that there's no safety signal, and then you have to actually mass produce it to vaccinate the entire world. So I do think that we have to think about fighting this virus without a vaccine for the foreseeable future.
Dr. Del Rio, what's the challenge in developing a vaccine for this specific virus? It doesn't mutate nearly as much as, say, the flu virus does, and that's one challenge for dealing with a flu virus. But can coronaviruses, or how can coronaviruses sometimes be more difficult to try to create immunity for?
Well, I think the challenge that we have is that when you are thinking, first of all, you need to find exactly what's the most immunogenic component of the virus. And we think it's going to be that entry point, that point to the spike protein that attaches to cells. But one of the concerns that many of us have is that you may actually see something called antibody-dependent enhancement with this virus. In other words, you know, we see patients with coronavirus, they're getting better, and then in the second week of their illness, they get suddenly worse. They get a cytokine storm. And that's probably their immune system reacting to the virus. So one of the concerns that many have is very much like we have seen in dengue. In dengue, for example, you can give a vaccine, and sometimes a vaccine actually increases the risk of when you get infected, getting a more severe disease. So that antibody-dependent immune enhancement is one of the concerns that many of us have, that you can have a vaccine that theoretically could prevent the disease in people that have never had it, but potentially make the disease worse in people that already had it. So it's challenging, it's tricky. There's going to be a lot of nuisances that need to be looked at. And also, quite frankly, the older you get, less likely you are to produce antibody. We know the disease is worse in older individuals, so you need to make sure that older people are actually going to respond.
Doctor said he has it. Doctor says he has it. Yeah.
I think we're having a little, Dr. Adalja, we're having a little trouble with him being able to hear us. So, Dr. Del Rio, I want to come back to you on that point. When you talk about older people not developing the antibodies as well, and also the way a vaccine could affect someone who has had that, I mean, both of those really make you stop, because there's been so much talk about the importance of antibody testing and antibodies and what that could tell us, and yet there are still these big questions about just how much immunity a person might build up and how long that will last. How does that figure in with the vaccine development?
Well, I would say, first of all, you don't stop. You take a pause and you do science, which is really, you ask hypothesis-driven research, which is what we do on a daily basis. As far as the antibody testing, I think there's a lot of antibody tests that are coming out there. I think a lot of those antibody tests tell us that somebody may have exposed, maybe somebody was infected. The current tests we have, not all of them tell you that somebody is immune. And again, we need to define what exactly immunity means. And we need to then develop a test that measures exactly immunity. Because you're able to measure immunity, then that'll be a different story. And we know that with many coronaviruses, immunity may last maybe, you know, most people will develop some sense of immunity. The question is, how long will it last? And will it be protective immunity? Or will it just be the type of immunity that you still get infected, but maybe don't get as sick?
Dr. Adalja, we'd have your audio problems fixed. It's great to have you back here. We're talking about antibody testing now. When Roche just win emergency FDA approval for an antibody test that they claim is nearly 100% effective in detecting antibodies. But that only goes so far, right? Because of what Dr. Del Rio was saying, which is the presence of antibodies leaves many questions unanswered at this point, correct?
Right. We don't know what protection that antibody serves. We know that people usually, when they recover from an infectious disease, have some period of time where they're not able to be reinfected, and that wanes with time. We need to know what level of antibody is required for that, how long does it last, and are you completely protected from reinfection, or do you just get infected and you don't have any symptoms, which we've seen with other coronaviruses. So there's a lot of questions about how we operationalize the use of antibodies. It definitely has value in trying to understand where a place is in their epidemic curve, how many people have gotten infected. But what it means at an individual level is something we need to study in detail.
As we look to not just at vaccines, but and the antibodies we talked so much about, there's been such a focus, of course, on remdesivir, and we know that there is now this emergency use authorization from the FDA, but we're also learning, Dr. Del Rio, that it will be the government who will decide who gets it. In your estimation, is that the best way to move forward with this treatment?
Well, at the end of the day, it has to be the physicians who decide who gets it. And remdesivir has received emergency authorization by the FDA to be used in people with severe, COVID disease. So it's not for everybody, it's those with severe disease. And we need to be careful that is decided the appropriate way and it's used the appropriate way. It is not, otherwise we're going to see a creep of its use, and we're going to start using it in places that really makes no sense. So I think it has to be decided by the physicians, take care of the patients, but it has to be, the allocation may be done by the government or may be done by authorities.
Dr. Adalja, if we can take a step back again and look at where we are today after a beautiful weekend around the country when we saw people out there, I wonder if the battle over the beaches misrepresents what the real discussion should be going forward, which is that, look, the country has, to an extent, reopened or begun to reopen in some places, so now we have to figure out the right way to do it. What are your concerns about doing this the right way?
Well, the concerns are that there may be people who have this false sense of security. The virus didn't go anywhere. The virus is still here. This is a respiratory virus. It spreads efficiently. We're going to be living with this for some time. So everybody, whether you live in a state that's open or not, a state that's not open, has to be smart about how they limit their exposure to this virus, especially if you're in a vulnerable population, because we are going to get more deaths from this. That's a matter of fact. The question is, we don't want those deaths to go to a level, or the hospitalization rate to go to a level that we get back into crisis where we were in March. So we need to be smart about this and make sure that we're taking the best steps we can, even when we're doing things like going to the beach. I think that's what the discussion has to be, and how to kind of live with this virus in a smart way, because it's not going to go anywhere until there's a vaccine.
Drs. Amish Adalja and Dr. Carlos Del Rio, appreciate you both joining us as always. Thank you.